Walter Eugene Radar O'Reilly. You can't talk about Radar without talking about MASH, and you can't talk about MASH without talking about Radar. So let's take a look at both.
Here they come!
I don't hear nothing.
Wait for it.
MASH is one of the most celebrated TV shows ever made. After a rocky start, it remained a top 20 show for its 11-year run on CBS, ending with a finale that was, at the time, the most watched single episode of any TV show ever. Over its lifetime, it received over 100 Emmy Award nominations with 14 wins. So yeah, that's a popular show. And a big part of the popularity of MASH was the character of Radar. He also appeared in the 1970 feature film the TV show was based on, and Gary Berghoff, who played him, was one of only 3 actors from the film's ensemble cast to play the same roles on TV. While Radar was actually a darker, more sketchy character in the movie, in the TV show he quickly softened into a man-child surrounded by the war-weary staff of the 407th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, getting into hijinks and each other's pants, trying to cope with the senseless violence of the Vietnam War, the Korean War. All through the chicanery, naive and dependable Radar kept doing his job as company clerk with supernatural precision.
Radar! Would you bring in some brandy, please?
You have that head doctor report to my office as soon as he can.
I think I'll call headquarters and get some help.
Oh, Radar,
Yes, sir, I'll
why
arrange
don't
a
you
tour for
arrange a
Dr. Borelli right away.
Dr. Borelli.
Oh, I took all the golf clubs and I hid them. And then I sewed up the hole in the nurse's tent.
Bring me the,
Fitness report.
not the fitness reports. You can't anticipate what I'm thinking. I'm not Henry Blake.
Yes, sir, I'm sorry, sir.
I want
efficiency.
the efficiency reports.
Now, spin-offs are a time-honored tradition in television, so naturally, a successful and character-driven program like MASH should give birth to a few. And so it goes. Trapper John McIntyre was a main character on the show, played by Elliot Gould in the original movie the show was based on, and then Wayne Rogers for the first 3 years of the TV series until the character was written out and B.J. Honeycutt, played by Mike Farrell, was created to replace him. Trapper John MD ran from 1979 to 1986 on CBS, with Pernell Roberts portraying the title character 28 years after his time in Korea, working as chief of surgery in a hospital in San Francisco. Premiering next was After MASH, a CBS program airing from 1983 to 1985, and finds original MASH characters Colonel Sherman Potter, Father Mulcahy, and Corporal Max Klinger working in a VA hospital in Missouri after the Vietnam War. The Korean War. While After MASH, it initially did okay in the ratings, it was ultimately felled by a show about another group of Korean veterans. Vietnam veterans. When it ended up having to do battle opposite the 3rd season of the A-Team. It was in a 2-parter episode on the show that Colonel Potter's former office clerk from the good old 407th, Radar O'Reilly, makes an appearance, having also made it back from Vietnam, Korea, but losing the family farm in Iowa he had talked so much about on the original MASH. Which brings us to the 1984 pilot for Walter, a MASH spin-off for the Radar character played by Gary Berghoff in the MASH movie, the TV shows, and now in his own Propose series. Walter only aired once though, and only in the East and Central time zones. It was preempted by coverage of the 1984 Democratic Party convention on the West Coast. The series was never picked up by CBS, you'll soon see why. Just to rip through the dubious premise, as shown in Radar's cameo episode of After MASH, Walter Radar O'Reilly has lost his farm in Iowa, his mother moving in with his aunt.
Oh, no.
In the new show, his wife, who he got back with at the end of his After MASH appearance, has now permanently run out on him, and he is living with his cousin Wendell Micklejohn in St. Louis, both of them working as police officers. Yes, that's right. Radar is a cop. What ensues in the next half hour are a bunch of lame comedy scenarios strung together trying to highlight just how much Radar is out of his element. His cousin pushes him around, his boss pushes him around, people on the street push him around, strippers push him around. It's mostly just a vehicle for one-liners and sight gags, and it becomes apparent pretty quickly that this show is just not going to work. MASH, the TV show, retained some of the anti-war sting of the subversive Robert Altman movie.
As the ceasefire officially goes into effect. There it is. That's the sound of peace.
And Aftermath stayed contextual by dealing with the aftermath of the Korean War. Walter, though, is played just as a zany comedy. The key to Radar in the original show was his innocence to the horribleness surrounding him. He was set in contrast to Hawkeye and Trapper John and BJ Honeycutt, all of whom were painfully and sardonically aware of their plight. Now, you might be saying, Bill, that's not fair to keep judging a show against a towering achievement like MASH. But seriously, even the title card for Walter is playing off the original show. And besides the asterisks in the title, the producers also try to add a dark edge to the show by subjecting Walter to a series of humiliations which causes him to become suicidal and decide to kill himself by overdosing on sleeping pills. And on the note of wanting to kill yourself, this is the very unfortunate part of the story. Not Radar wanting to commit suicide, but Victoria Jackson's appearance. The future Saturday Night Live performer appears here as a drugstore clerk named Victoria.
Not me, no siree.
I think Victoria's incessant shrieking demands of Radar to smile in her scene says everything that needs to be said about Victoria Jackson's kind of comedy, air quotes, air quotes.
Smile, darling, you smile. You know the world is not so bad after all. Hey, smile, darling, you smile. And everything will fall into place. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Smile, darling, you smile. Walter! Smile, smile, smile.
Also, let me just complain about the horrid laugh track on this thing. I mean, laugh tracks in general are a pox. But Walter has a laugh track that seems to fire off at random.
So I started growing things.
And?
Things died. I lost the farm.
I see.
Yes, sir. Wendell Micklejohn, he got me on the force.
I love you, but I love Claude Greevy more. He will never be as nice and sweet and forgiving as you, but the truth is, he makes me lose the use of myself.
I'd like an overdose of sleeping pills, please.
See you Saturday.
Yeah, I'll be here.
Funnily enough, one of the things producers fought for on the original MASH was not to have a laugh track, although a compromise was struck with the studio where any scenes in the OR had the laugh track omitted. But you know, I can see why the producers of Walter might have felt the need to instruct the audience when to laugh, because none of it was funny. But then spamming the laugh track just makes that all the more apparent. What the hell are people laughing at? So context is king, and the joy of MASH is watching the characters walk a tightrope between the harrowing madness of war and an entertaining comedy show. After MASH continues this in the context of a VA hospital, dealing with the aftermath of war and the battles vets must face even after coming home. Walter, on the other hand, like its namesake, is a fish out of water in the context of MASH spin-offs. It totally misses the mark. In its defense, they do show a couple of brief situations where the predictive abilities of Radar, the aspect of his character that we recognize from the show, are highlighted. I mean, that's why he has the nickname Radar, right? He knows things. But there are too few of these moments to keep us really familiar with the character. There is also a bit of emotional heft with Radar and his relationship with a young street pickpocket, but this feels parachuted in. You really have to try harder if you're spinning a character off MASH. It's a tough mantle to take, but it's the responsibility you assume when you make a spin-off of something with such a pedigree. To try and superimpose tragedy on top of the character of Radar was a mistake. It might have worked if it had been made apparent that Radar's difficulties were due to his adjusting to civilian life, if all his misfortunes were because of these difficulties. Instead, they just heaped a lot of arbitrary bad luck onto his lap in order to strip away the home life that we learned about on MASH and get him into the situation of this new show. If you want to spin off a show, you can do a sitcom, sure, but you can't produce a show laboring in the looming shadow of MASH and expect to find success with just meaningless, inane wackiness.
Not exactly the way I wanted to say goodbye, Radar.
Me either, sir.
I'm Bill, and I really want to thank you for watching what I've made. If you want to see more of it, give that subscribe button a push, ring that bell, and please get in touch if you have any feedback. Later.
Goodbye, Radar.